Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're not just going to read about history, we're actually going to reconstruct an entire human world. We're stepping right out of the comfort of the modern era and into the unvarnished, sensory reality of the 19th century American frontier. Just close your eyes for a second. Imagine the ceaseless, howling wind of the Great Plains, the suffocating dust of the overland trails, and the immense, frankly terrifying emptiness of an untamed continent. This is a journey into how ordinary people, mothers, farmers, and pioneers survived extreme elements to literally lay the foundations of a new civilization. I want you to let the stark reality of these words really sit with you for a moment. Such a sight I have not seen, lo, these many weeks. She was talking about shade, just a simple, desperate longing for a shadow. The pioneer journey wasn't some romantic adventure. It was a grueling, physically exhausting endurance test. Families traveled on foot or in these bone-jolting wagons through scorching heat, completely exposed to the indifferent wrath of nature.
So how did they endure? How did ordinary people build a civilization out of dirt, wind, and profound isolation? Okay, let's dive into this because the answer really challenges our modern assumptions about human resilience. Surviving the American West wasn't just a matter of brute physical labor. It was a relentless psychological and chemical battle against severe environmental constraints. Every single structure they built, every meal they preserved, was a calculated act of defiance against a landscape that fundamentally did not want them there.
Part 1, The Reality of the Trail. Our story actually starts with the profound physical shock of the westward migration itself.
Back in the established East, society operated on very rigid expectations of gender roles, right? Men handled commerce and heavy field labor, while women managed the domestic sphere. But the trail instantly stripped away those polite societal norms. Out of pure, unadulterated necessity, those lines blurred completely. Women suddenly found themselves driving heavy, stubborn ox teams, yoking cattle, and loading wagons. Meanwhile, men, facing the sudden sickness or exhaustion of their wives, had to take on domestic cooking and washing. When survival is your only goal, usefulness matters a whole lot more than societal labels.
And survival was absolutely never guaranteed. Think about this. At least 20,000 immigrants were buried along the Oregon Trail alone. 20,000. That staggering number is a harsh reminder that the frontier was defined by fatal, ever-present risks. And it wasn't dramatic raids that claimed the most lives. It was the invisible killers. We're talking about cholera contracted from contaminated water, dysentery, mountain fever, and just simple, crushing physical exhaustion. Death was a constant traveling companion. Part 2, Architecture of the Frontier. Now, what's really interesting about this next stage is how geography entirely dictated shelter. When those who survived finally reached their claims, they didn't impose their architectural will on the landscape totally imposed its will on them. Where timber actually existed, settlers built what the 19th century writer Baynard Hall famously described as a barbarous rectangle. So forget the cozy, romanticized log cabin you might be picturing. These were damp, dark, rough-hewn logs notched together with gaps that had to be ferociously daubed with yellow clay and mud just to keep the wind out. With floors made of Mother Earth itself, these were crude, sensory fortresses against a very hostile wilderness. But as settlers pushed further onto the arid, treeless expanses of the Great Plains, they had to become masterful environmental engineers. Without wood, what do? You turn to the earth itself. They literally cut the dense, deep-rooted prairie grass into bricks to construct sod houses, or soddies. These were homes made of dirt that actually offered brilliant thermal insulation against the brutal summers and lethal winters, even if they did unfortunately leak muddy water during rainstorms. Others tunneled dugouts straight into hillsides, or threw up flimsy pine claim shanties wrapped in tar paper, mostly just to satisfy the legal residency requirements of the Homestead Act. Part 3, The Chemistry of Frontier Survival. Because securing a roof was really only the first step, next came the relentless, daily labor required simply to preserve food and maintain hygiene. Without refrigeration, preserving animal protein for the winter literally meant the difference between life and starvation. Imagine the tactile, chemical necessity of a salt cure. Raw meat was meticulously rubbed with salt, completely buried in it, and placed in a cool area. And then, for a grueling 28 days, more salt was constantly added to draw out every single ounce of moisture before the meat was washed and aged. This wasn't some fun culinary hobby. This was an absolute mandate for making it to spring alive. Let's move to and see how this builds into other areas of daily life, like hygiene. You couldn't just pop down to the store and buy soap. Pioneer women endured noxious, incredibly harsh labor to manufacture basic household goods entirely by hand. They gathered hardwood ashes, leached water through them to extract caustic lye, and then stood over open fires, boiling that dangerous skin-burning lye with rendered animal fat. It was an exhausting process requiring immense physical capital just to maintain basic human dignity on the frontier. Part 4. The pathology of isolation. Because mastering the physical environment definitely did not guarantee mental survival. In fact, the frontier's greatest enemy was often the crushing weight of emptiness. The Homestead Act of 1862 granted settlers 160-acre plots of land. Now, while this offered an unprecedented economic opportunity, it inadvertently engineered an environment of really dangerous, crushing isolation. Because of how these vast tracts were spaced out, families lived a half-mile or more apart from their nearest neighbor, totally separated by an ocean of grass. And this geographic reality fell most heavily on women. See, men occasionally traveled to distant railroad towns for trade or communal labor, but women were often completely tethered to the homestead. One primary historical account notes how pioneer women, trapped in the isolation of a prairie soddy, often saw no friendly face for months at a time. Try to just imagine the profound silence of that existence, broken only by the relentless wind. So the crucial point is that this total lack of community pushed early settlers to the brink of a documented psychological crisis known as prairie madness. The visual monotony of a flat, treeless landscape, the howling wind that literally never ceased, and the agonizing grief of high child mortality created this claustrophobic trap. Mastering the dirt meant absolutely nothing if your mind shattered in the process. Part 5. Recreating the community. To save their own sanity, settlers quickly realized they had to actively engineer social institutions. Survival required connection. They essentially built 3 vital pillars to weave these fragmented, isolated families back into a functioning society: the one-room schoolhouse, the itinerant circuit rider, and the massive, highly emotional camp meeting. These weren't just cultural luxuries. They were essential survival mechanisms for the human spirit. Take a look at this historical 1880s schedule for a one-room schoolhouse, and this brilliantly illustrates how deeply these pioneers valued order. Despite the wild chaos outside, inside there was rigid structure: McGuffey readers, handwriting drills, and cowboy math. The schoolhouse essentially became the town hall and the very heartbeat of the local community, bringing critical moral instruction to the plains. And before they could even build churches, religion came to them on horseback. Methodist circuit riders, who you could easily spot by their flat-crowned white hats and saddlebags stuffed with Bibles, traveled these expansive, dangerous geographic loops just to minister to isolated cabins. It was unbelievably grueling work. The physical exhaustion and exposure to extreme weather were so severe that nearly half of these itinerant preachers died before they even reached the age of 33. They quite literally gave their lives to deliver faith and human contact to the frontier. But the ultimate cure for prairie isolation was the camp meeting. Imagine spending 10 months in the silent sensory deprivation of a solitary dirt house, only to finally arrive at a post-harvest, late-summer outdoor revival. Hundreds of settlers camped together, engaging in explosive, highly emotional sermons and group singing. It was powerful, necessary social medicine, just an overwhelming release of pent-up emotion that reaffirmed for all of them that they were not alone in this fight. Today, the National Park Service meticulously preserves these authentic environments, from the untamed tallgrass prairie right down to the one-room schoolhouses. By studying these sites, we aren't just looking at old buildings, right? We're actually honoring the incredible resilience, the engineering ingenuity, and the cooperative labor that forged the modern American West. Which leaves us with a final, echoing thought. We've seen how these pioneers conquered dirt, preserved their food through harsh chemistry, and built schools and camp meetings just to stave off the madness of profound isolation. So, in our highly connected yet increasingly lonely modern world, what do these historical struggles for sanity and community on the frontier reveal about our own primal need for human connection today? Thank you for exploring the past with me in this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep looking back to understand where we're going.